Actually, during my presentation, I will tell you a little bit about myself. So if you don't mind, I would like to start and you'll get to know more about me as we go through my presentation. A values approach to sustainable community development. For me, community development is for everybody, not just the impoverished or the wealthy. I think nowadays we're all part of multiple communities, particularly now that we've gone online. We seem to be part of so many more communities, and all of them need to be developed. Yes, there are some that have special needs, but we also know, if we look at how the urban areas are developing throughout the world, how in many regards people are becoming more and more isolated, even though they're surrounded by many people. And I think the whole world is looking at the way things have been and the things are going into the future and how we can contribute to a better world. I'm just going to that. There are many definitions of community development, and all of them are great. Yes, of course, we want participatory democracy, sustainable development, etc. And the definitions have changed slightly over time. What I think is very important, and I think this was touched on in one of the earlier sessions this morning, is to be very sensitive and aware of the context that we're in, at our place in history. Yes, we've got a history of injustices, fast development in many areas, particularly economic development. And the future, as COVID has taught us, is incredibly unpredictable. And at the same time, migration is at unprecedented levels, whether it's voluntary or we're running away from something, to the point where strangers are often our neighbors nowadays. And, you know, I look at this COVID situation, and I do believe that every situation has something for us to learn from. And however dire and however scary COVID may be, I think there are some things that maybe it's magnifying for us to see in greater clarity than we have before. So to tell you a little bit about myself, my parents come from Iran. They left Iran during the Second World War and actually met up in Yorkshire. I was born in Turkey. The first few years of my life was in Ethiopia. My parents worked for WHO. I've lived in Ireland, in Dublin, and I grew up in the UK. And in the UK, in the north, in the south, in the east, also London. And when I had a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old, I moved to Namibia, lived there for 4 years. Another child was born to me. And then we moved on to South Africa. My 3 children have all grown up. They're in different parts of the world. They have their own families. And I have continued my nomadic lifestyle. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And particularly, I was in China for 7 years. And so people ask me, as we all do when we meet somebody, where do you come from? And every time this throwaway question comes my way, I take a deep breath, and I'm not sure what to say actually sometimes. When I was in China, I learned a beautiful phrase that in some ways helped me out when I was there, 四海为家, which means I'm from 4 seas, I'm from everywhere. And yet when I've traveled and lived and been part of all these different cultures, I haven't been somebody that sat with the expats. I've wanted to embrace wherever I am. And, you know, one of the things that became very clear for me when I was in China was because, maybe just to say, for years I taught at the university there. And then I worked for the Education Bureau, working in government schools, helping them to review the pedagogy that they are accustomed to. And I noticed in that time in the schools that their textbooks showed the world with China in the middle, while I had grown up in the UK, and that's where I'd gone to school, etc. And so the map on the West is the one that I was familiar with. And that's just one of many things that would take a little bit of time for me to think about things and adjust my view of the world. And I kept thinking to myself, I feel comfortable in all of these places. And what is it that is actually holding me and is allowing me to go and really embrace wherever I am at that time? And one of the things that became very clear to me is that in every place that I lived, people had their own culture. They had their own food, their own way of dancing, their own music, etc. And these were all great. And when I came back to Cape Town about 3 years ago, and I went to Masiphumelele, which is a township in Cape Town, it's geographically one of the smallest, but it's so densely populated, as you will have noted from my abstract. And I spoke to people there and I spoke of culture. They spoke about, there's a group of Zimbabweans who live there, and Malawians and Ethiopians, and they all live in different areas. And I asked them, is this a peaceful environment? And they all said yes. But the more I spoke with the people in Masiphumelele, it became obvious that each very much stayed in their own areas. So the question I had, was that really a peaceful environment where people could work together for the betterment of the community? And when I asked what was the culture of Masi, which is short for Masiphumelele, they looked at me and they said, well, what do you mean? It's our Zimbabwean culture or our Ethiopian culture. And I said, well, if you had to describe, let's say, another township or another part of Cape Town, how would you describe it? And again, they really couldn't understand where I was coming from. So I said, well, if you had a friend coming from another country, would you suggest that they come and live in Masi, or would you suggest that they go and live in Inyanga, another township, or another one, Khayelitsha? And I said, how would you describe these places? Isn't that the culture of these places? As to, whether it's a toxic environment, whether it's a peaceful environment, these are evidences, symbols of the culture that's in these various places. And so a conversation started to develop along, what do we really mean by culture? Is it only something that we inherit or are we all co-creators of the culture of the communities that we are a part of? And maybe I could just say that at the moment, this is my passion and this is where I want to spend the rest of my life working. Prior to this, my very first degree in the 70s in the UK was in computer science, long before the computers that we know today. And gradually I, developed and went further into technology, ended up working for big corporates, big international organizations, and I was very much a corporate cat. And about 20 years ago, I did the executive MBA at the business school here at UCT, at the University of Cape Town. And I became very interested in values and culture and what all of this meant, predominantly driven by the corporate culture that I was a part of. And it's another culture that's here. And in fact, what's on the screen now, please excuse so many words on a screen. But this is from my dissertation, where I looked at the role of values in decision-making and relationships in the corporate world. And as I went back to my dissertation, and I was quite surprised that, 20 odd years later, I'm coming back to where I was in doing my PhD now. I thought, what if I change wherever it says organization culture to community culture? Is this the same? Is it something that we are co-creating together? And I started to think, although, I was in technology, being a corporate person, ended up being the director of companies, so very much in that world, then I left it, and I've done so many other things since then, and my heart is in contributing to a better world. Maybe everything is actually connected. And these boxes that we create for ourselves actually limit us in learning from our experiences and contributing to each other's learning. And organizations, that's where the money's made. That's where the money is for research. We battle to get the same level of investment in community and socioeconomic development as in the business world. But a lot of what I came across when I was studying for my executive MBA, I can see actually applies in whatever community we're part of which we're all part of multiple communities today. And that's one of the challenges as well. In the past, 100 years ago, we were basically part of our geographically bound community. But today, we're part of multiple communities. And how do we reconcile who we are and how we present ourselves in each of these spaces? Another thing that has come from my dissertation, and this is, as I said, 20 odd years ago, so it's very corporate because it was a business degree I was studying for. It's how do you feel when you work in an organization? Do you feel empowered? Do you feel liberated? Do you feel you can bring your whole self to work? Or do you feel restricted and that for your survival, you must actually leave part of yourself at home? Can this actually be brought through to community development as is the topic in this conference today? And it's interesting because in corporate speak and organization speak in that regard, diversity nowadays is being sought. That is what research is saying. You want to make money, you want to capture the marketplace, etc. Bring in diversity, because that is what we need to co-create the future. And that is what I believe we need in the townships, in all the communities that I'm a part of and that I can imagine. Diversity can only add richness, but diversity is not easy. And we have to really think about what it is that's going to bring us together. What is going to bring the Ethiopian, the Zimbabwean, the Malawian, sectors of Masiphumelele together, and what's going to bring them together with the rest of Cape Town and its other communities.
Thanks, Taraneh. You'll need to start to wrap up now because that's your 10 minutes, okay?
Oh my gosh, okay, I'll try and be very quick then.
Thank you.
So, thank you, sorry about that. So here, this screen here is very much about looking at nature. And we may think it's utopian, but nature is a wonderful example of how different colors, different hues of all the beautiful flowers come together to make that beautiful garden. It's not a utopian thing I'm talking about. There are many things today that we have seen that 100 years ago were unimaginable. But to become aware of those deep-seated values is not easy. And excuse me for rushing through now. And it's something that has been spoken about a lot in business. They're talking a lot about this, and it's the values that bring us together. What do we really mean and can transcend all boundaries so we have a common understanding? The culture of peace. Culture is very much driven by values. The UN declared it from 2000 to 2010. And yet, in 2014, when there was a review, there wasn't much out there in the public domain. Why? In South Africa, we didn't really do very much. Why? Currently, we're in the midst of the Nelson Mandela Decade of Peace. Where is it? I don't see much around me in evidence of this. Why? It's tough, I understand that, but maybe we need to go down to this level. So in essence, the message that I'd like to share today, we need to harmonize what is intrinsic in human nature, which I believe is driven by our values, to foster a sense of unity and aspirations so that together we can facilitate the discovery and implementation of practical solutions to real problems. Thank you.